The banging on my front door at 8:15 in the morning wasn't just rude, it was aggressive. I opened it to find Karen Wilmore, HOA board member, standing there with a clipboard like she was ready to conduct a military inspection. "Mr. Beckett Rhodes," she said, with that fake smile she always used when she was about to say something wildly offensive. "We've had reports of suspicious individuals loitering near your property. Do you know them?" I knew exactly who she was talking about. The suspicious individuals were the new neighbors 2 doors down, Miguel and Camila Torres. They'd moved in last month with their 3 kids, hard-working folks, super friendly. We'd had them over for barbecue twice already. "You mean Miguel and Camila?" "Yeah, I know them. They live here," I said, already annoyed. Karen leaned in like she was confiding some secret. "We've had some calls. Some of the residents are concerned. They weren't on our move-in logs. No rental application filed with the HOA. We're treating them as potential trespassers until we confirm otherwise." I blinked. "You're treating them like what? They bought the house." "Well, until we see proper documentation, the HOA patrol has been instructed to keep an eye on them." "HOA patrol?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Since when do we have a patrol?" She tapped her clipboard. "We're allowed to monitor for compliance. It's in the bylaws." I wasn't buying it. "You have no authority to harass people in their own driveway, Karen." She sniffed. "I'm just doing what's best for the community." I shut the door in her face. That afternoon, I saw it with my own eyes. 2 guys in bright yellow vests marked HOA Compliance Enforcement rolled up in a golf cart and parked in front of the Torres place. Miguel was pulling weeds near his mailbox. One of the guys got out and started filming him on his phone. Camila came out, clearly confused. "Can I help you?" "You're on private HOA property," the guy said. "We're documenting a trespassing complaint." I couldn't believe it. I grabbed my phone and started recording from my porch. "Hey, she lives here. Back off." The guy turned, annoyed. "Sir, stay on your property." I kept filming. "You're harassing a homeowner on their own lawn. Keep going. You're going to be on the evening news." Miguel's hands were clenched, but he kept calm. "I have my deed. We bought this house outright." "Who the hell are you?" "We're the HOA patrol," the guy said like it meant something. I walked over. "No, you're not. You're just dudes in vests. This isn't legal enforcement. You're trespassing, not them." Karen showed up 10 minutes later, arms crossed, lips pursed. "I warned you, Beckett," she said. "You're obstructing an HOA investigation." I laughed. "What you're doing is racial profiling and illegal surveillance." She turned to the patrol guys. "Get their names. He's aiding unauthorized occupants." Miguel looked at me, furious and humiliated. Camila was already pulling their closing documents from a folder she'd brought out. That's when I got an idea. "Hey, Miguel," I said, lowering my voice. "You okay if I call in a favor?" He nodded. "We just want to be left alone, man." I went inside, grabbed my old press badge I used to freelance for a local station back when I had more hair and fewer bills, and made a call to a buddy of mine who still worked there. "You're going to want to see this footage," I said, uploading the video. "HOA harassment in real time. You'll love it." By 6 that evening, the video I'd sent to my buddy at the station had already aired on the 6 o'clock spotlight. They ran it with the headline, "Neighborhood Watch or Racial Profiling. HOA Patrol Sparks Outrage in Willow Glen." The footage showed Miguel being filmed without consent, Camila trying to reason with the so-called patrol, and me stepping in. They blurred faces, but it didn't matter. Everyone in the neighborhood knew exactly who was who. Less than an hour after it aired, my phone rang. "Beckett Rhodes," a woman's voice asked. "Yeah, who's this?" "Detective Alondra Reyes, Community Response Division. I'd like to speak with you about the footage aired this evening, particularly about the individuals identifying themselves as HOA enforcement." I paused. "You think it's criminal?" "We're not ruling anything out. Impersonating security personnel, unauthorized surveillance, potential civil rights violations, we're taking it seriously." I gave her everything. The names I knew, how long it had been happening, and that the HOA had never disclosed any kind of formal patrol at meetings. She asked if Miguel and Camila would be willing to speak with her too. I told her I'd ask. I walked over to the Torres place just after sunset. Miguel was out back, fixing a broken gate hinge. Camila was inside, helping their youngest with homework. "Miguel," I said, "I've got a detective from the city who wants to look into what happened." She saw the news segment. "She's not just checking boxes." He stood up slowly. This going to get worse before it gets better, isn't it? I won't lie, probably. But if you talk to her, it doesn't stay their word against yours. It becomes evidence. He wiped his hands on a rag. Let's do it. I've got nothing to hide. The next day, Detective Reyes showed up in an unmarked sedan. Slim, sharp-eyed, with a badge clipped to her belt but no nonsense in her step. She interviewed Miguel and Camila for over an hour. I stayed on my porch, sipping coffee and listening to the occasional raised voice drift over mostly Miguel, venting everything he'd held in. When Reyes stepped onto my lawn afterward, she looked like she'd already made up her mind. Those patrol guys, she said, they aren't licensed in any capacity. No private security certification, no city permits. And the HOA never filed anything about a compliance task force. They made it up. I frowned. So what now? They pretended to be legal enforcement while documenting someone without cause. That's impersonation. And depending on who authorized them, we may be looking at conspiracy to commit civil rights violations. That night, 3 police cruisers rolled up to Karen Wilmore's house. I was outside watering my lawn when I saw it. 2 officers walked up to her door and knocked. She answered in a robe, hair pinned back, one hand on her hip like she couldn't be bothered. Ms. Wilmore, we have a warrant to search your premises and seize any records pertaining to the Willow Glen HOA enforcement program, one of them said. She froze. You're joking, she said. I'm not. They stepped inside while she stood there, stunned. Neighbors began to trickle out of their homes. First the Harpers across the street, then old Mr. Matheson with his dog, and then Gwen's. Everyone murmuring, eyes locked on Karen's brightly lit doorway. 15 minutes later, the officers rolled out with 2 plastic bins full of documents and a laptop. The next morning, I got a visit from someone I hadn't seen in over a year, Avery Lind, former HOA president. He'd stepped down last winter, citing personal reasons, but everyone knew Karen had pushed him out. Beckett, he said, glancing nervously around. I think I made a mistake letting her take over. I stepped aside and motioned him in. Coffee, please. He sat at my kitchen table like he had something heavy sitting on his chest. When I left, there was no patrol, no compliance unit. The board had strict limits on discretionary spending. But I just heard from Donna, the treasurer, before she quit. Karen started siphoning money from the general maintenance fund into a separate account labeled Security and Order. I leaned in. You're saying she embezzled? He nodded. $10,000. Maybe more. She used it to pay those guys. They weren't volunteers. They were getting checks. I stared at him. You can prove that. I've got Donna's resignation letter and 3 financial reports she saved before she left. Karen had the account hidden behind a shell line item labeled Landscaping Subcontractors. I called Reyes. That afternoon, she returned with a forensic accountant from the city. They sat at my dining table while Avery handed over the documents, one by one. By the end of the week, the city issued a cease and desist order against the Willow Glen HOA's governing board. A temporary injunction froze their funds pending a civil investigation. But Karen wasn't done. At the next emergency HOA meeting held in the community clubhouse, she stood at the front, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. We've been unfairly targeted, she said to the crowd. The media twisted the truth. The patrol was meant to ensure safety, nothing more. Someone in the back shouted, then why'd you pay them from a fake account? She ignored it. We need to move forward. I propose we reauthorize the board's spending authority and reject the city's interference. Avery stood up from his seat beside me. You don't get to propose anything. You obtained funds under false pretenses. You targeted residents based on ethnicity. You impersonated law enforcement. And now you think we'll hand you the checkbook again? Karen's face flushed red. You've all been manipulated, she snapped. By him, she pointed at me, and by him at Avery, and by outsiders who don't understand how HOAs work. You mean people who follow the law? Someone else said. I raised my hand. I moved for a vote of no confidence in the current board. A dozen hands shot up, then 2 dozen, then the whole room. Karen looked around, realizing she'd lost control. She turned to storm out, but Detective Reyes was already at the door. Ms. Wilmore, she said calmly, you're under arrest for misappropriation of community funds and unlawful surveillance. You have the right to remain silent. The room fell silent as Reyes read her rights. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the click of handcuffs. As they walked her out, eyes downcast. I turned to Miguel and Camila, who were sitting near the back. Camila whispered, "It's over." "Just starting," I said. "But now it's on our terms." Later that week, the city appointed interim oversight for the HOA while a full audit was conducted. Avery came out of retirement to help draft a new charter that required quarterly open-book financial reviews and banned any form of private enforcement without a city permit. Miguel joined the reform committee. So did Camila. They weren't just residents now. They were leaders. The Torres kids rode their bikes down the street that Saturday. No patrols. No surveillance. Just a neighborhood finally remembering what it felt like to be a community again. And as for me, I mounted a motion-activated camera above my porch not to catch anyone but to remind them, we're watching now. All of us. 2 weeks after Karen's arrest, the neighborhood looked physically the same trimmed hedges, same mailboxes, same lazy summer breeze, but the undercurrent had shifted. People spoke to each other more. Neighbors who used to wave from driveways now crossed the street to talk. It was like the whole subdivision had taken a deep breath after holding it for too long. But calm doesn't mean closure. On a quiet Thursday morning, Detective Reyes called again. "Beckett," she said, "we need to meet. It's about something we found in the files seized from Wilmore's home." We met at a small municipal building downtown, the kind of place with scuffed tile floors and humming fluorescents. She led me into a small room where a man in a navy suit waited with a leather folder on the table. He introduced himself as ADA Marcus Leclerc. Reyes gestured to the folder. "This goes deeper than just misused funds." Leclerc slid a document across the table. It was a printed spreadsheet, line after line of addresses from our neighborhood, including my own, next to columns labeled Watch List, Compliance Risk, and, chillingly, Ethnicity Proximity Factor. I stared at it. "What the hell is this?" Reyes answered. Karen kept detailed notes on homeowners, ranking them based on subjective, racially biased criteria. She wasn't just targeting the Torres family. She had a plan to reshape the neighborhood, one compliance violation at a time. Leclerc leaned in. "The language in this document matches phrases used in redlining practices that violate federal housing laws. If we can prove she used HOA authority to discourage or expel families based on race or ethnicity, we're talking about civil rights violations on a federal scale." My stomach turned as I flipped through the pages. Next to Miguel and Camila's names were notes like recent arrival, no legacy ties, and language barrier, likely compliance leverage. I looked at Reyes. "She wrote this down? In detail?" Reyes nodded. "Full digital backups, too. She saved all of it to a cloud drive under her personal login. No password encryption. Arrogance works in our favor." Leclerc continued. "We've already submitted evidence to the Department of Justice. A federal civil rights investigation is underway. But here's where you come in. We need community testimony. Your footage started all this, but a pattern of abuse is what will seal it." Later that day, I stood in the Torres living room again, this time surrounded by paperwork and court documents. Miguel was silent as I explained what Reyes had shown me. Camila gripped the edge of the table like it was keeping her anchored. "She had a ranking system," I said. "She wasn't just profiling. She had a blueprint." Miguel's jaw tightened. "You mean to tell me she tried to build a system to drive people out? Like real displacement?" I nodded. "She was methodical. She disguised it as compliance enforcement, but it was crafted to push out families she didn't want here." Camila stood up, walked over to the window, and took a long breath. "So what now? We go to court?" "More than that," I said. "We help take the whole structure apart. Every rule she twisted, every process she corrupted, it all gets reviewed. That means depositions, public records, and exposing the people who helped her." Miguel looked up. "You think there were others?" "There had to be," I said. "She didn't sign those checks alone. Someone approved those patrol uniforms. Someone helped her hide the accounts." By the following week, subpoenas were delivered to 3 former board members. One of them, Brad Hensley, had been quiet since the news broke. He lived 2 streets over, rarely seen outside his garage. When Reyes and Leclerc pulled him in, he cracked almost immediately. According to the deposition transcripts, Brad admitted that Karen had promised him a future role in a restructured HOA leadership circle once the compliance campaign cleared out what she called non-cohesive elements. He claimed he didn't know the full extent of her motives, but the language in his emails told a different story. He'd written things like, Phase 2 should target the renters next and document all violations, even small ones. Build a case. The DOJ's Civil Rights Division moved quickly. Within a month, Karen was hit with new charges: conspiracy to violate civil housing rights, abuse of fiduciary responsibility, and unlawful surveillance. Brad faced obstruction charges. Two others, who had resigned quietly months earlier, were named in the civil suit filed by the Torres family and two other affected homeowners. The community was no longer just watching, we were organizing. Avery called for a full charter rewrite. Not just tweaks, a complete overhaul. We held open meetings at the clubhouse 3 times a week. Every clause was reevaluated. Every loophole was closed. Camila took charge of the committee, drafting the new compliance guidelines. She was relentless, articulate, unshaken, and focused. Miguel handled outreach, making sure renters, long-time owners, and even the previously silent neighbors had seats at the table. One night, after a particularly long session, Avery pulled me aside. "You know," he said, "I never thought I'd see the day this neighborhood got its soul back." I raised an eyebrow. "You think we're there?" He shook his head. "Not yet. But we're finally walking in the right direction." 2 weeks later, the DOJ sent a formal letter confirming that Willow Glen HOA was under federal oversight for a minimum of 3 years pending the outcome of the case. A monitor would be appointed to review all board decisions. The HOA's authority to issue fines or enforce compliance was suspended until the new charter passed legal review. The Torres family's civil suit gained traction. Their attorney filed for damages related to emotional distress, defamation, and violation of housing protections. It wasn't just a legal win, it was public vindication. And then something unexpected happened. Families from nearby neighborhoods reached out. They came to our meetings. They shared stories. In one HOA, a similar private patrol had been quietly dissolved 6 months earlier. In another, a board president was caught funneling funds into an untraceable community enhancement budget. Our HOA had gone from being a cautionary tale to a blueprint for reform. One evening, months after the initial story broke, I stood on my porch again. Not with a camera this time, just watching. Kids were playing tag across 3 lawns. Someone was grilling farther down the block. Miguel waved at me from his driveway, tools in hand, working on a new garden bed. Camila walked over with a clipboard. "We're finalizing committee chairs for the next term. You in?" I laughed. "What's the job?" "Neighborhood Media Liaison." I raised an eyebrow. "That a real title?" "Now it is." I took the clipboard. "All right. Let's make sure no one ever has to go through what you did." She smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that says something's been earned. And that night, for the first time in a long while, the neighborhood didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like home. Camila's garden committee had just finished planting native shrubs along the east entrance when 2 men in navy suits stepped out of a black Crown Vic and started walking toward the community clubhouse. It was early afternoon, sun high, cicadas buzzing, and not a single person in the HOA office expecting them. Miguel and I watched from across the street. We'd been replacing the faded wooden slats on the community bulletin board. He glanced at me, jaw tense. "FBI?" he asked. "U.S. Attorney's Office," I said. "They're not here for landscaping advice." The taller of the 2 men, sharp jaw, flat expression, opened the clubhouse door without knocking. The other clutched a thick binder under one arm, his ID visible on a lanyard. Assistant United States Attorney, Civil Rights Division. They didn't speak to anyone right away. They didn't have to. The federal monitor assigned weeks ago had gone quiet after her initial review. We assumed she was digging through records. What none of us knew was how far down the hole went. That evening, we held an unscheduled meeting in the same room they'd walked into. The mood was tight. Half the chairs were filled, most by homeowners who hadn't shown up to anything in years. Rumors had spread fast. People wanted answers. The lead attorney stood at the front, hands clasped behind his back. "My name is Patrick Voss," he said. "I'm here on behalf of the United States Department of Justice. What we're about to disclose involves criminal allegations against members of the former HOA board, as well as contractors hired under fictitious pretenses." He turned to Camila, who now chaired the Interim Compliance Committee. "Mrs. Torres, your testimony and documentation have been instrumental. As of this morning, a federal grand jury returned indictments for wire fraud, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, and falsification of municipal records." Gasps rippled through the room. I saw Mrs. Greer from Elm Court clutch her chin as if she'd been slapped. Miguel leaned forward. "How did they get away with all of it for this long?" Voss opened the binder. "They didn't. They just assumed no one would dig. He laid out the findings. Karen had hired a private data aggregation firm illegally contracted using HOA funds to run background reports on dozens of residents, many of whom had never received a single violation. The reports collected data beyond anything remotely related to property standards, immigration history, family structure, employer lists. The kicker? The board had authorized those payments through a shell vendor called Greenwood Services, which didn't exist as a legitimate company. The address on the invoices led to a mailbox in a strip mall 10 miles away. The payment trail went straight to a private account in Brad Hensley's name. That's when things turned from bad to staggering. Voss continued. Our forensic team uncovered surveillance logs, handwritten and digital, that detailed resident routines over several months. These weren't compliance checks. They were patterns. When people left for work, when kids walked to school, who had guests over. Reyes, sitting at the back, stood up. We believe they were building a dossier, she said. Not for protection, for leverage. Anyone who pushed back too hard could be discredited. Or worse, targeted. Avery stood, slow and deliberate. You're saying they were organizing a blackmail scheme? Voss nodded. That's the working theory. We've filed motions to seize the board's personal devices. The digital evidence is extensive. I looked around the room. Some people were stunned. Others looked like they'd known something was off for years but never wanted to admit it. Still, no one said a word until Mr. Ing, a quiet man who lived near the west gate, raised his hand. Are we safe? He asked. I mean, are they still watching? Reyes answered. Those involved are either in custody or under house arrest. We've served warrants to shut down the surveillance systems they installed. If you find anything unusual on your property, wiring, motion sensors, camera housings, report it. That night, Camila called an emergency vote. With a unanimous decision, the HOA's existing charter was dissolved entirely. In its place, we authorized a temporary neighborhood council made up of 10 elected members, no board, no executive officers, just residents with equal say. The council would be reevaluated every 6 months. All financial decisions would be published in a public ledger posted online and physically at the clubhouse. 2 days later, I got a visit from someone I hadn't seen in years. Lena Morales, civil rights attorney. We went to college together. She took the law path. I took journalism. She'd seen the coverage online and reached out. You've got a rare thing here, she said, sipping iced tea on my porch. A community that witnessed abuse and did more than just complain. You built something. Most neighborhoods fold. They let the power structure rebuild itself with a new face. We're not looking to franchise it, I said. She grinned. No, but you could help others who can't speak as loudly. I leaned back in my chair. You suggesting we what? Form a watchdog group. She nodded. Or a nonprofit. Start local. Use your footage, your documentation, your model. Help other neighborhoods audit their HOAs. Prevent this from happening again. I stared at her, then out at the street. Miguel and Camila were walking their kids home from the park. Avery was trimming weeds near the stop sign. A group of teenagers played basketball on a portable hoop someone had dragged into the cul-de-sac. It didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like something worth preserving. 3 weeks later, we filed paperwork for a nonprofit, Homeowner Oversight Alliance. Not flashy, not political. Just a toolkit and a network for people who'd been silenced under the weight of petty tyrants with too much power. Camila took a seat on the board. Miguel started leading workshops on how to interpret HOA bylaws and financial records. Avery offered consulting to nearby communities. Lena helped us draft legal templates for residents to file public information requests and challenge illegal fines. The Torres family civil case ended in a landmark settlement. The HOA's insurance provider, faced with overwhelming evidence of systemic abuse, agreed to pay damages that would allow Miguel and Camila to start a scholarship fund for local youth interested in public service. One of their kids drew the logo, a simple house with a shield around it. We printed it on every flyer. By fall, Willow Glen wasn't just on the map, it was in the news again. This time for launching a neighborhood-led movement that helped pass a city ordinance requiring all HOAs to undergo annual audits by third-party firms. The ordinance included strict limits on surveillance, mandatory transparency for contracting, and a public complaint process independent of board influence. I'd never imagined I'd be sitting on a city panel explaining how we caught a conspiracy using a garden hose, a barbecue invitation, and a cell phone camera. But there I was. And when someone asked what I'd say to other neighborhoods facing the same kind of abuse, I didn't even have to think. Film everything, I said. Ask questions. Share food. Don't wait for someone else to fix it. You live there. You already have the right to be heard. A month later, the last of the former board members entered guilty pleas. No drawn-out trial. No denials. Just quiet admissions and permanent bans from holding any fiduciary or governance roles in any HOA or residential board again. Their houses sold within weeks. New families moved in. No one asked for their paperwork at the curb. No golf carts circled their driveways. No compliance notes appeared on their doors. Just neighbors. And every time I see a porch light flick on or a kid ride past on a scooter, I remember the simple truth we learned the hard way. Power, once challenged, doesn't disappear. But it does change hands. This time it's ours.